On today's episode, we'll be covering the devastating Bath School Massacre.
Take a trip with me, baby, let's meander. Going through so many Great Lakes standards. See the sights, highlights of Barry Sanders. Come along with the random Michigander.
Welcome to the Random Michigander. I am your host, Brandon Griffiths. I'll be providing a regular dose of Great Lakes State-related topics in podcast form, from history and events to locations, popular culture and sports, as well as food and drinks, and basically anything else that might help you learn more about the great U.S. state of Michigan. Today's topic is a little grim. It's about the Bath School disaster, also known as the Bath School Massacre. For a little background, Bath Charter Township is a civil township located 10 miles northeast of the city of Lansing in the U.S. state of Michigan. The township covers 31 square miles, and the small unincorporated village of Bath is within its borders. The township itself lies within Clinton County, Michigan, an area of about 566 square miles. In the early 1920s, the area was primarily agricultural. After years of debate, Bath Township voters approved the creation of a consolidated school district in 1922, along with an increase in township property taxes to pay for the new school. When the school opened, it had 236 students enrolled from grade 1 through 12. The school's creation was controversial, but Monty Ellsworth wrote in his book about the disaster that consolidated schools had great advantages over the smaller rural schools that they replaced. All landowners within the township area had to pay higher ad valorem property taxes, and at the time of the bombing, Bath Township had about 300 adult residents. Now on to Andrew Kehoe. Andrew Philip Kehoe was born in Tecumseh, Michigan on February 1st, 1872, into a family of 13 children and attended the local high school. After graduating, he studied electrical engineering at Michigan State College in East Lansing and moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where he had worked as an electrician for several years. At some point during this period, Kehoe suffered a head injury in a fall and was semi-conscious or in a coma for a period of several weeks. He later returned to Michigan and his father's farm. After his mother's death, Kehoe's father married a much younger widow, Frances Wilder, and a daughter was born. On September 17, 1911, as his stepmother attempted to light the family's oil stove, it exploded and set her on fire. Kehoe threw a bucket of water on her, but the fire was oil-based, and his action spread the flames more rapidly, which engulfed and immolated the woman's body. The injuries were fatal, and she ended up dying the next day. Some of Kehoe's later neighbors in Bath Township believed that he had caused the stove explosion. Kehoe married Ellen Nellie Price in 1912 at the age of 40. 7 years later, they moved to a farm outside of Bath Township. Kehoe was said to be dependable, doing favors and volunteer work for his neighbors. He was also described as being notoriously impatient with any disagreement. He had shot and killed a neighbor's dog that had come on his property and annoyed him by barking. He had also beaten one of his horses to death when it did not perform to his expectation. Kehoe had a reputation for frugality and was elected in 1924 as a trustee on the school board for 3 years and treasurer for 1 year. He argued strongly for lower taxes, and later superintendent of the board M.W. Keyes said that he had fought the expenditure of money for the most necessary equipment. Kehoe was considered difficult to work with, often voting against the rest of the board, wanting his own way, and arguing with the township financial authorities. He protested that he paid too much in taxes and tried to get the valuation of his property reduced so that he would pay less. In 1922, the Bath Township school tax was $12.26 for every $1,000 valuation of property, with the valuation on Kehoe's farm being $10,000, which is roughly equivalent to about $188,000 in 2024. In 1923, the school board raised the tax to $18.80 per $1,000 valuation, And in 1926, the taxes went up to $19.80. This meant that Kehoe's tax liability went from $122.60 in 1922 to $198 in 1926, which is equivalent to about $3,500 in 2024. This meant that Kehoe's tax liability went from $122.60 in 1922, which is about $2,300 in 2024, to $198 in 1926, which is about $3,500 in 2024. In June 1926, Kehoe was notified that the widow of his wife's uncle, who held the mortgage on his property, had begun foreclosure proceedings. Following the disaster, the local sheriff who had served the foreclosure notice reported that Kehoe had muttered, "If it hadn't been for that $300 school tax, I might have paid off this mortgage." Mrs. Price, the mortgage holder, also reported that Kehoe had stated, "If I can't live in that house, no one will," when she had mentioned the foreclosure to him. Kehoe was appointed in 1925 as temporary town clerk, but he was defeated in the April 5th, 1926 election for that office. This public rejection by the community angered him. Ellsworth speculated that this defeat triggered Kehoe's desire for murderous revenge, using the bombings to destroy the Bath Consolidated School and kill the community's children and many of its members. In the book Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing, Arnie Bernstein cites Robert D. Hare's psychopathy checklist and says that Kehoe fits the profile all too well. Carnegie Mellon University's Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, head of CMU's Department of Forensic Science, has stated that Kehoe could be described as an injustice collector, meaning someone who obsessively collects perceived thoughts along with their personal misfortunes, latching onto these feelings of persecution until the individual feels forced to lash out. Kehoe's neighbor, A. McMullen, noted that Kehoe had stopped working on his farm altogether for most of the preceding year, and he had speculated that Kehoe was planning suicide. Kehoe had actually given him one of his horses around April 1927, but McMullen returned it for the reason of knowing that his mental state was not good. It was discovered later that Kehoe had cut all his wire fences as part of his preparations to destroy his farm, hurdling young shade trees to kill them, and cutting off his grapevine plants before putting them back on their stumps to hide the damage. He gathered lumber and other materials and put them in the tool shed, which he later destroyed with an incendiary bomb. By the time of the bombing, Nellie Kehoe had become chronically ill with what resembled tuberculosis, for which there was no effective treatment or cure at the time. Her frequent hospital stays may have contributed to the family's debt. Kehoe had ceased making mortgage and homeowners insurance payments months earlier. So now we get on to the preparations that Kehoe was making. There is no clear indication of when Kehoe had the idea of massacring the school children and townspeople, but Ellsworth, who was a neighbor, thought that he had conceived this plan after being defeated in the 1926 clerk election. The consensus of the townspeople was that he had worked on his plan at least since the previous August, which would have been 1926. Bath School Board member M.W. Keyes was quoted by the New York Times, "I have no doubt that he made his plans last fall, 1926, to blow up the school. He was an experienced electrician, and the board employed him in November to make some repairs on the school lighting system. He had ample opportunity then to plant the explosives and lay the wires for touching it off." Kehoe had free access to the school building during the summer vacation of 1926. From mid-1926, he began buying more than a ton of pyritol, an incendiary explosive used by farmers during the era for excavation and burning debris. In November 1926, he drove to Lansing and bought 2 boxes of dynamite at a sporting goods store. Dynamite was also commonly used on farms, so his purchase of small amounts of explosives at different stores and on different dates did not raise any suspicions. Neighbors reported hearing explosions on the farm, with one calling him the dynamite farmer. After the disaster, it was reported that Michigan State Police investigators had discovered a considerable amount of dynamite had been stolen from a bridge construction site, and that Kehoe was suspected of the theft. Investigators also recovered a container of gasoline rigged with a tube in the school's basement. Investigators speculated that Kehoe had planned that the gasoline fumes would ignite from a spark, scattering burning gasoline throughout the basement. In the undamaged section of the school, it was found that Kehoe had concealed the explosives in 6 lengths of eaves trough pipe, 3 bamboo fishing rods, and what were described as windmill rods that were placed in the basement ceiling. Kehoe purchased a .30 caliber Winchester bolt-action rifle in December of 1926, according to the testimony of Lieutenant Lyle Morse, a Michigan State Police investigator with the Department of Public Safety. Then he went on to make further preparations. Prior to the day of the disaster, Kehoe had loaded the back seat of his truck with metal debris capable of producing shrapnel during an explosion. He had also bought a new set of tires for his truck to avoid breaking down when transporting the explosives. He made many trips to Lansing for more explosives, as well as to the school, the township, and his house. Ida Hall, who lived in a house next to the school, saw activity around the building on different nights during May. Early one morning after midnight, she saw a man carrying objects inside the school. She also saw vehicles around the building several times late at night. Hall mentioned these events to a relative, but they were never reported to the police. Nellie, Kehoe's wife, was discharged from Lansing's St. Lawrence Hospital on May 16th and was murdered by her husband sometime between her release and the bombings 2 days later. Kehoe put her body in a wheelbarrow at the rear of the farm's chicken coop, where it was found in a heavily charred condition after the farm explosives and fire. Piled around the cart were silverware and a metal cash box. The ashes of several banknotes could be seen through a slit in the cash box. Kehoe placed and wired homemade Pyritol firebombs in the house and throughout the farm buildings. Now we move on to the day of the disaster, starting with the farm bombs. At approximately 8:45 a.m. on Wednesday, May 18th, Kehoe detonated the firebombs in his house and farm buildings, causing some debris to fly into a neighbor's poultry brooding house. Neighbors noticed the fire and volunteers rushed to the scene. O.H. Bush and several other men crawled through a broken window of the farmhouse in search of survivors. When they found no one in the house, they salvaged what furniture they could before the fire spread into the living room. Bush discovered dynamite in the corner and he picked up an armful of explosives and handed it to one of the men. As Kehoe left the burning property in his Ford truck, he stopped to tell those fighting the fire that they should get to the school and then just drove off. The North Wing explosion. Classes at Bath Consolidated School began at 8:30 a.m. Kehoe had set an alarm clock in the basement of the school's north wing, which detonated the dynamite and Pyritol he had hidden there at about 8:45 a.m. Rescuers heading to the scene of the Kehoe farm fire heard the explosion at the school building and turned back in that direction. Parents within the rural community rushed to the school. The school building resembled a war zone, with 38 people killed in the initial explosion, mostly children. Witnesses and survivors were interviewed afterwards by newspaper reporters. First grade teacher Bernice Sterling told an Associated Press reporter that the explosion was like an earthquake. The air seemed to be full of children and flying desks and books. Children were tossed high in the air. Some of them were catapulted out of the building. Eyewitness Robert Gates said the scene was pure chaos at the school. Mother after mother came running into the schoolyard and demanded information about her child, and on seeing the lifeless form lying on the lawn, sobbed and swooned. In no time, more than 100 men at work tearing away the debris of the school, and nearly as many women were frantically pawing over the timber and broken bricks for traces of their children. I saw more than one woman lift clusters of bricks held together by mortar heavier than the average man could have handled without a crowbar. Ellsworth recounted, I saw one mother, Mrs. Eugene Hart, sitting on the bank a short distance from the school with a little dead girl on each side of her and holding a little boy, Percy, who died a short time after they got him to the hospital. This was about the time Kehoe blew his car up in the street, severely wounding Perry, the oldest child of Mr. and Mrs. Hart. The north wing of the school had collapsed, leaving the edge of the roof on the ground. Ellsworth recalled that there was a pile of children of about 5 or 6 under the roof. He volunteered to drive back to his farm and get a rope heavy enough to pull the school roof off the children's bodies. Returning to his farm, he saw Kehoe driving in the opposite direction, heading toward the school, and Ellsworth said he grinned and waved his hand, Ellsworth said. When he grinned, I could see both rows of his teeth. Truck explosion. Kehoe drove up to the school, about a half an hour after the first explosion. He saw Superintendent Emery Hoyk and summoned him over to his truck. Charles Rawson testified at the coroner's inquest that he saw the two men grapple over some type of long gun before Kehoe detonated the explosives stored in his truck, immediately killing himself, Hoyk, retired farmer Nelson McFerrin, and Cleo Clayton, an 8-year-old second grader. Clayton had survived the first blast and then wandered out of the school building. He was killed by shrapnel from the exploding vehicle. The truck explosion spread debris over a large area and caused extensive damage to cars parked a half block away, with their roofs catching on fire from the burning gasoline. It injured several others and mortally wounded Postmaster Glenn O. Smith, who lost a leg and died before making it to the hospital. Recovery and rescue. Telephone operators stayed at their stations for hours to summon doctors, undertakers, area hospital workers, and anyone else who might help. The Lansing Fire Department sent several firefighters and its chief. Local physician J.A. Crum and his wife, a nurse, who had both served in World War I, turned their Bath Township drugstore into a triage center. Dead bodies were taken to the town hall, which was used as a morgue. Hundreds of people worked in the wreckage all day and into the night in an effort to find and rescue any children pinned underneath. Area contractors sent all their men to assist, and many other people came to the scene in response to pleas for help. Eventually, 34 firefighters and the chief of the Lansing Fire Department arrived, as did several Michigan State police officers who managed traffic to and from the scene. Michigan Governor Fred W. Greene arrived during the afternoon of the disaster and assisted in the relief work, carting bricks away from the scene. Lawrence Baking Company of Lansing sent a truck filled with pies and sandwiches, which were served to rescuers in the township's community hall. The injured and dying were transported to Sparrow Hospital and St. Lawrence Hospital in Lansing. The construction of the St. Lawrence facility had been financed in large part by Lawrence Price, Nellie Kehoe's uncle, and formerly an executive in charge of Oldsmobile's Lansing car assembly. During the search for survivors and victims, rescuers found an additional 500 pounds of dynamite, which had failed to detonate in the south wing of the school. The search was halted to allow the state police to disarm the devices. They found an alarm clock timed to go off at 8:45 a.m. Investigators speculated that the initial explosion may have caused a short circuit in the second set of bombs, preventing them from detonating. They searched the building and then returned to the recovery work. Police and fire officials gathered at the Kehoe farm to investigate the fires there. State troopers had searched for Nellie Kehoe throughout Michigan, thinking that she might be at a tuberculosis sanatorium, but her charred remains were found the day after the disaster among the ruins of the farm. While the Kehoe farm buildings were destroyed, Kehoe's 2 horses had burned to death, trapped inside the barn. Their carcasses were found with their legs hobbled together with wire, preventing their escape or rescue. Investigators found a wooden sign wired to the farm's fence with Kehoe's last message stenciled on it. Criminals are made, not born. Aftermath. The American Red Cross set up an operations center at the Crum drugstore and took the lead in providing aid and comfort to the victims. The Lansing Red Cross headquarters stayed open until 11:30 that night to answer telephone calls, update the list of dead and injured, and provide information and planning services for the following day. The local community responded generously, as reported at the time by the Associated Press. A sympathetic public assured the rehabilitation of the stricken community. Aid was tendered freely in the hope that the grief of those who had lost loved ones might be even slightly mitigated. The Red Cross managed donations sent to pay for medical expenses of the survivors and the burial costs of the deceased. In a few weeks, $5,284.15, which is the equivalent to roughly $96,000 in 2024, was raised through donations, including $2,500 from the Clinton County Board of Supervisors and $2,000 from the Michigan legislature. The disaster received nationwide coverage in the days following, sharing headlines with Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic crossing, though Lindbergh's crossing received much more attention, and eliciting a national outpouring of grief. Newspaper headlines from across the U.S. characterized Kehoe as a maniac, a madman, and a fiend. People from across the world expressed sympathy to the families and the community of Bath Township, including letters from some Italian school children. One fifth-grade class wrote, "Even if we are small, we understand all the sorrow and misfortune that has struck our dear brothers." Another Italian class wrote, "We are praying to God to give to the unfortunate mothers and fathers the strength to bear the great sorrow that has descent on them. We are near to you in spirit." Kehoe's body was claimed by one of his sisters and was buried in an unmarked grave in the paupers section of Mount Rest Cemetery in St. John's, Michigan. Price family buried Nellie Price Kehoe in a Lansing cemetery under her maiden name. Vehicles from outlying areas and surrounding states descended upon Bath Township by the thousands. Over 100,000 vehicles passed through on Saturday alone, an enormous amount of traffic for the area. Some residents regarded this as an unwarranted intrusion into their time of grief, but most accepted it as a show of sympathy and support from surrounding communities. Burials of individual victims started that Friday, 2 days after the disaster. Funerals and burials continued on Saturday and Sunday until all the dead were buried. For a time following the tragedy, the town and Kehoe's burned out farm continued to attract curiosity seekers. Rebuilding. Governor Greene quickly called for donations to aid the townspeople and created the Bath Relief Fund, with the money supplied by donors, the state, and local governments. People from around the country donated to the fund. School resumed on September 5th, 1927, and for the 1927-28 school year was held in the Community Hall, Township Hall, and 2 retail buildings. Most of the surviving students returned. The board appointed O.M. Brandt of Luther, Michigan, to succeed Hoyk as superintendent. Lansing architect Warren Holmes donated construction plans, and the school board approved the contracts for a new building on September 14th. On September 15th, U.S. Senator James J. Couzens presented his personal check for $75,000, which is equivalent to $1.4 million in 2024, to the Bath Construction Fund to help build the new school. The board demolished the damaged portion of the school and constructed a new wing with the donated funds. During the reconstruction, dynamite was found in the building on 3 separate occasions. The James Couzens Agricultural School was dedicated on August 18, 1928. The Kehoe farm was completely plowed to ensure that no explosives were hidden in the ground and was sold at auction to pay the mortgage. Coroner's inquest. The coroner arrived at the scene on the day of the disaster and swore in 6 community leaders that afternoon to serve as a jury investigating the death of Superintendent Hoyk. Informal testimony had been taken on May 19th, and the formal coroner's inquest started on May 23rd. The Clinton County prosecutor conducted the examination, and more than 50 people testified before the jury. During the testimony, David Hart stated that Kehoe had told him that he had killed a horse, and the New York Times reported people as saying that Kehoe had an ungovernable temper and seemed to have a mania for killing things. Neighbors testified that he had been wiring the buildings at his farm about that time and that he was evasive about his reasons. Kehoe's neighbor Sidney J. Howell testified that after the fire began at the Kehoe farm, Kehoe warned him and 3 men to leave there, saying, "Boys, you are my friends. You better get out of here. You better go down to the school." 3 telephone linemen working near Bath Township testified that Kehoe had passed them in his truck on the road toward the school, and they saw him arrive there. His truck swerved and stopped in front of the building. In the next instant, according to the linemen, the truck blew up, and one of them was struck by shrapnel. Other witnesses testified that Kehoe paused after stopping, calling Hoyk over to the truck, and that the 2 men struggled before Kehoe's truck was blown up. Although there was never any doubt that Kehoe was the perpetrator, the jury was asked to determine if the school board or its employees were guilty of criminal negligence. After more than a week of testimony, the jury exonerated the school board and its employees. In its verdict, the jury concluded that Kehoe conducted himself sanely and so concealed in his operations that there was no cause to suspect any of his actions, and we further find that the school board and Frank Smith, janitor of the school building, were not negligent in and about their duties, and were not guilty of any negligence in not discovering Kehoe's plan. The inquest determined that Kehoe had murdered Hoyk on the morning of May 18th. It was also the jury's verdict that the school was blown up as a part of the plan that was Kehoe's plan alone, without the aid of any conspirators. He murdered 43 people in total, including his wife Nellie. Suicide was determined to be the cause of Kehoe's death, which brought the total number dead to 44 at the time of the inquest. On August 22nd, 3 months after the bombing, fourth grader Beatrice Gibbs died following hip surgery. Hers was the 45th and final death directly attributable to the Bath School disaster, which made the event the deadliest attack ever to occur in an American school to date. Richard Fritz, whose older sister Marjorie was killed in the explosion, was injured and died almost 1 year later of myocarditis at the age of 8. Although Richard is not included in many lists of the victims, his death from myocarditis is thought to have been directly caused by an infection resulting from his injuries. Legacy. Artist Carlton W. Angel presented the board with a memorial statue in 1928 entitled Girl with a Cat. The Bath School Museum in the school district's middle school contains many items connected with the disaster, including that statue. In 1975, the Cousins building was demolished, and the site was redeveloped as the James Cousins Memorial Park, dedicated to the victims of the disaster. At the center of the park is the Bath Consolidated School's original cupola. I don't know how to pronounce that word, I'm so sorry, which survived the disaster and remained on the school until the Cousins building was torn down. After some debate, a Michigan State historical marker was installed at the park in 1991 by the Michigan Historical Commission. In 2002, a bronze plaque bearing the names of those killed in the disaster was placed on a large stone near the entrance of the park. On November 3rd, 2008, the town announced that tombstones had been donated for Emily and Robert Bromont, the last two bombing victims whose graves were still unmarked. A grant from the foundation paid for the grave markers. In September 2014, a gravestone was installed at the grave of Richard A. Fritz, whose death in 1928 was attributed to injuries sustained in the explosion. The gravestone was paid for by an author writing about the disaster for a book. A documentary on the disaster was released in 2011, including interviews with various survivors, which had been taped starting in 2004. May 18th, 2017, the disaster's 90th anniversary, was marked with a panel discussion at the Bath Middle School. On May 1st, 2022, weeks short of the disaster's 95th anniversary, Irene Dunham, the last Bath School student from the time of the disaster, died at age 114. The disaster is regarded by some as an act of terrorism. Arnie Bernstein, author of Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing, said that it resonates powerfully for modern readers and reminds us that domestic terrorism and mass murder are sadly not just a product of our times. Medical experts writing in the Journal of Surgical Research characterized the disaster as the largest pediatric terrorist disaster in U.S. history. Harold Schechter, who wrote Psycho USA and Maniac, called the disaster a horrendous act of terrorist mass murder. So that is the story of the Bath School massacre. I would call it a massacre. It's obviously a disaster as well. It's a reminder that there are just evil people out there, and it's just a very unfortunate thing. Very, very sad reading this story and seeing what a deranged man this Andrew Kehoe was. So this is a pretty devastating installment. It was tough to learn all of this stuff about this. I didn't know all of it. There are more episodes to come. I think I might need a palate cleanser after this one, maybe a couple palate cleansers. So we will see when the time comes what those will be. But all right, everyone. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.